So in 2010, a team of researchers did something that, honestly, it sounds like the setup to some bizarre science fiction movie.
Oh, the Tokyo subway experiment. Yeah, that one it's a classic.
Right. So they took this brainless slime mold, placed it on this really intricate map of Tokyo, and they put little oat flakes at the exact geographical locations of the city's major surrounding hubs.
Mm-hmm.
And then, they just watched. And within a single day, this blind, brainless organism expanded, retracted, and eventually locked in to this really distinct web-like pattern.
Which is crazy on its own.
Yeah, but then when the researchers overlaid that biological pattern onto the actual map of Tokyo, they realized the mold had flawlessly recreated the Tokyo subway system.
Flawlessly.
Right. I mean, it had solved this massive logistical puzzle that took human engineers decades of meticulous planning, and it did it in 24 hours.
It's a staggering experiment, honestly, and it completely shifts our perspective on, well, what intelligence actually looks like in the natural world.
Exactly. And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. So we are exploring a really fascinating cross-disciplinary article from the Substack called SpiralSeekr.
Yep.
And it's titled Mycelial Computing and the Information Network of the Forest.
Mm-hmm.
And this piece argues that the subterranean fungal network beneath our feet is, it's acting less like a simple botanical organism.
Yeah.
And way more like a massive decentralized biological computer.
Right. One that is actively managing the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
Which is precisely why this text is so compelling, I think.
Yeah.
It sits perfectly at this weird intersection of biology, technology, and philosophy. It basically demands that we look at the dirt we walk on not as a passive environment, but as active hardware.
Okay, let's unpack this hardware then.
Mm-hmm.
Because to understand that Tokyo subway experiment or how a forest, computes, we really need to understand the physical structure itself first.
Good point.
So the text focuses heavily on the mycelial network. And for anyone listening who might not be visualizing this, we are talking about a sprawling subterranean web made up of these microscopic threads called hyphae.
Right, the hyphae.
And these threads are so dense that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can contain like miles of them.
Which is just so hard to wrap your head around. Miles
Yeah.
in a teaspoon.
I know. And this web is expansive enough that it physically wires together the root systems of entirely disparate flora. So we're talking trees, bushes, ferns, connecting them all into one massive grid beneath the soil.
Right. And to explain what this grid is actually doing, the author introduces the concept of cybernetics.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in the realm of systems theory, cybernetics is the study of regulatory systems, feedback loops, and information flow.
Okay.
It is the science of how any system, whether that's mechanical, digital, or biological, how it senses its environment, processes that incoming data, and adjusts its behavior to maintain stability.
Gotcha.
So, the text argues that when you map the mathematical flow of resources against the actual topographical layout of a forest, the mycelium acts as the primary cybernetic grid for that ecosystem.
Okay, I want to stop and push back on this just a little bit.
Sure.
Because I think it's really easy for us to anthropomorphize nature. Right?
Absolutely.
When the author uses words like cybernetic grid and calculating and information flow, I have to ask, is this just a really elegant, poetic metaphor?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, water flowing down a mountain isn't doing math, right? It's just passively following gravity. Isn't a fungus just following, like, chemical concentration gradients in the dirt?
That is the exact right question to ask.
Right, because where is the actual computation happening?
Exactly, and that gets to the absolute core of the article's premise. If the mycelium were just relying on passive diffusion, like a drop of food coloring spreading evenly through a glass of water, you would be entirely right.
Okay.
But the text highlights that this structure possesses a striking isomorphism to human packet-switching networks.
Isomorphism meaning?
Meaning a direct structural and mathematical similarity. They're structurally the same. The network actively transports carbon, water, and vital nutrients against concentration gradients.
Right, against them.
Yes. It uses internal pressure to push resources to specific targeted locations, actually spending energy to override the simple physics of passive diffusion.
Okay, wow. So it's not just a sponge soaking things up, it's making choices, sort of. You mentioned packet switching networks, which is, that's a foundational concept in computer science.
Right.
How does a biological organism do packet switching?
Well, think about how the internet works. When you send an email, it doesn't travel as one giant clunky block of data through a single wire.
Right, it gets broken up.
Exactly. The data is broken down into smaller packets. Those packets are individually routed through whatever paths in the network are currently the fastest or most efficient, and then they are reassembled at the destination. The mycelial network does this biologically.
Oh, wait.
Yeah. It bundles nutrients into chemical packets and dynamically routes them through millions of interconnected hyphal threads based on real-time feedback about where the ecosystem is deficient.
So instead of routing data packets, it's basically routing survival packets.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's look at exactly how this biological internet routes its traffic, because the text gives a highly specific example of this resource allocation algorithm playing out in real time.
Right, the Sapling example.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, imagine there is a specific geographical node in this forest network. It's a young, struggling sapling, deeply shaded by larger trees so it can't get sun. And it happens to be heavily deficient in phosphorus.
Which is a critical element for photosynthesis and root development. I mean, without it, that sapling dies.
Right. So how does the network respond? The mycelium actually identifies this localized deficit through chemical signatures. It recognizes the sapling is struggling, and then it physically reroutes the necessary chemical packets of phosphorus from older established trees nodes in the forest that happen to have a surplus.
It's incredible.
The fungus acts like a biological router, sending the packets exactly where they are needed most to keep the entire system balanced.
What's fascinating here is the sheer mechanics of that complex pathfinding. I mean, routing resources sounds straightforward, but when you are dealing with millions of interconnected biological nodes over hundreds of miles.
Yeah, the scale is insane.
Finding the most efficient path for those chemical packets is an incredibly dense mathematical challenge. In human computer science, we test this using something called the Traveling Salesperson Problem.
I am so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because this connects perfectly back to the Tokyo subway experiment I mentioned at the very start of the deep dive.
Right, exactly.
For anyone unfamiliar, the Traveling Salesperson Problem is this notoriously difficult algorithmic puzzle. The goal is to find the absolute shortest possible route that connects a large set of destinations without ever retracing your steps.
Which sounds simple on paper.
Right, it sounds simple, but as you add more destinations, the number of possible routes just explodes exponentially. It requires massive centralized computing power for humans to solve at scale.
It is literally considered a benchmark test for computational efficiency. And yet, these fungal networks and slime molds solve it routinely, and they do it without a centralized processor.
Okay, this is where we have to talk about the how.
Yes.
Because the text notes that the slime mold replicated the life's work of Tokyo's top civil engineers. But how does a puddle of brainless goo actually execute that math?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not sitting there with a tiny biological calculator.
No. It is computing through its own physical growth and biological fluid dynamics.
Okay, walk me through that.
So when the mold explores an environment, it expands blindly in almost all directions at first, creating this massive chaotic web of tiny tubes.
Like it's just feeling around in the dark.
Exactly. But here is the mechanism. When one of those expanding branches encounters a food source, like those oat flakes representing the Tokyo hubs, the mold begins pulsing.
Wait, pulsing? Like a heartbeat?
Exactly like a heartbeat. It is a process called shuttle streaming.
Shuttle streaming, okay?
Yeah, these rhythmic contractions basically pump fluid and nutrients back and forth through the tubes. Now, the tubes that successfully connect to the food sources experience a higher volume of this fluid flow.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. Due to the physical pressure, the successful tubes literally grow thicker and stronger. Meanwhile, the tubes that hit dead ends or take inefficient winding routes, they experience less flow.
And so they die off.
They physically wither away.
That is just incredible. So it's not thinking in the way we do, with a brain. It's using the physical laws of fluid dynamics to automatically reinforce the most efficient paths and literally dissolve the bad ones.
Exactly.
So the shape of the network itself is the algorithm. It calculates by growing.
Precisely. Every single microscopic thread is simultaneously calculating the path of least resistance while maintaining the resilience of the overall web. It adapts dynamically as conditions change, routing around obstacles instantly.
Okay, so routing food and water is one thing. That is pure logistics, just keeping the trees alive.
Right.
But, any IT professional will tell you that an internet doesn't just route Amazon packages and emails.
It has to deal with malware.
Exactly. It has to deal with cybersecurity threats. So what happens when this biological network faces an active malicious threat? Does a forest have a firewall?
It does, actually, and the biological mechanics of this are quite remarkable. The text explains that this subterranean infrastructure serves as an early warning immune topology for the entire forest.
Immune topology.
Yeah.
Well,
So when plants connected to this network are attacked, for example, if aphids start munching on their leaves, or if there is an infiltration of pathogenic bacteria, they do not just suffer in isolation.
okay, what do?
They release very specific defensive chemical signals down into their roots. The text highlights defense-inducing allelochemicals and phytohormones.
Okay, let's pause there for a quick translation because those are some heavy terms. When we say allelochemicals and phytohormones, are we basically talking about the plant equivalent of a distress flare?
That is a perfect way to look at it. Phytohormones are basically chemical messengers that regulate a plant's internal functions, while allelochemicals are biochemicals a plant produces specifically to influence the survival or behavior of other organisms around it.
So it's broadcasting a signal.
Right. When the plant is damaged, it synthesizes these distress flares and pushes them down into its root system directly into the fungal network.
And this right here, this is the real aha moment of the article for me. Because those chemical flares don't just stay trapped in the dirt beneath that one single tree.
No, they don't.
They are intercepted by the mycelium, packaged and transmitted through the hyphal threads across the entire forest. So you have distant trees, physically miles away, completely untouched by the aphids or the bacteria, and they are intercepting these warning packets.
It's basically a biological early warning system.
Yeah. And the text notes that these distant trees will then proactively upregulate their own enzymatic defenses, meaning they start producing bitter tannins or defensive toxins to make their leaves unappetizing before the threat even reaches them.
They're preemptively arming themselves based on intelligence gathered by a completely different species on the other side of the forest.
I was trying to visualize how this works without a brain, and the best way I can picture it is less like a centralized group chat on your phone and more like a massive crowd doing the wave at a sports stadium.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The tree getting attacked starts the wave. It drops that chemical pulse into its roots. The adjacent fungus picks up the pulse and physically pushes that chemical pressure to the next node, and the next just rippling outward in a massive circle. The trees miles away don't need to actually know what an aphid is. They just sense the wave coming and automatically pull up their chemical drawbridges.
The stadium wave analogy is excellent for visualizing the physical spread, definitely. But we should also look at the technological comparison the text draws to truly understand the structural marvel here.
Okay, hit me.
In traditional human communication networks, even something like a group chat, there is still a central server routing that data. There is a centralized processing unit somewhere.
Right, like a data center.
Exactly. But in the mycelial network, there is no central server. The text argues that this immune topology functions exactly like a peer-to-peer torrent infrastructure or a cryptographic ledger.
Okay, I want to make sure we really nail this concept for everyone listening. When you say a peer-to-peer torrent infrastructure, you mean like how people used to download files on the early internet?
Exactly. Think about how a torrent works compared to a normal download. If you download a file from a central server and that server crashes or gets hacked, nobody can get the file. The system is entirely vulnerable. But in a peer-to-peer torrent, the file isn't sitting on one central computer. Tiny bits of the file are distributed across thousands of individual users' computers. So when you download it, you are pulling tiny fragments from hundreds of different nodes simultaneously.
I see. So there's no head to cut off.
Exactly. The logic and the memory of the network are intrinsically distributed across the entire web. The forest stores its memory of successful resource routes and past threat responses in the physical thickening of specific hyphal pathways.
Oh, just like human brains.
Very similar, yes. Similar to how human brains form memories through the thickening of neural pathways, where, neurons that fire together wire together.
So because the architecture is decentralized, if a massive wildfire burns down, say, a quarter of the forest, or a logging company clears a massive swath of land, the overarching network doesn't completely crash. The surviving nodes still retain the collective chemical memory and the routing algorithms because every part of the network is simultaneously the server and the user.
Precisely. It is the ultimate resilient network.
So what does this all mean? If we take a step back and just synthesize everything we've unpacked from this article so far.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. We are looking at a subterranean network that can dynamically route vital chemical resources using fluid dynamics. It can assess localized pathogenic threats. It transfers complex information packets over massive distances.
Right.
And it does all of this using a decentralized hardware architecture that actually rivals our most sophisticated software engineering.
It really does.
SpiralSeekr argues that when you layer all of these capabilities together, the distinction between a biological organism and a geographical computational matrix just completely dissolves.
And this raises an important question, which is really the ultimate philosophical pivot of the article.
Okay.
Right now, humanity is spending billions of dollars and unimaginable amounts of electricity trying to build our most advanced artificial neural networks. We pride ourselves on being at the bleeding edge of innovation.
Sure. Yeah.
But the provocation here is, are we genuinely inventing new cognitive topologies? Or are we merely rediscovering the primordial geometric code that is already written into the dirt beneath us?
Man, that is a profoundly humbling thought. It makes you realize that Silicon Valley isn't necessarily inventing the future. They might just be inadvertently plagiarizing the dirt.
Plagiarizing the dirt. I love that phrasing.
Yep.
But yeah, essentially.
The mathematical language of computation isn't something we just magically created.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental property of the biological universe that fungi figured out, what, 1 billion years ago?
Easily. And engaging with that reality requires you to fundamentally reconsider your own definition of sentience.
Yes, sir.
Well, in Western science, we have historically associated consciousness almost exclusively with a centralized processor, a brain.
Right.
We just assume intelligence requires a central command center. But if the Earth itself executes complex optimization algorithms, if it reacts to external stimuli, protects its vulnerable nodes, and physically stores memory across a decentralized web, at what point must we redefine the boundary of consciousness itself? Is a distributed network capable of its own form of decentralized sentience?
It is a massive paradigm shift. And I really want to bring this lofty philosophy back down to your everyday reality for you listening to this right now. The takeaway here is incredibly tangible. The next time you walk through a local park or go for a hike in the woods, just look down at the soil. You aren't just walking on dirt, dead leaves, and primary decomposers. You are quite literally walking on top of a massive, silent, hyper-efficient biological supercomputer.
It's true.
One that is actively sensing the pressure of your footsteps, calculating the chemical state of the ecosystem, and quietly protecting the life all around you in real time.
You know, knowledge is always most valuable when it forces a permanent shift in our perspective.
I agree completely.
And I think once you learn to see the forest, not as a collection of individual competing plants, but as an ancient, collaborative, peer-to-peer network, it fundamentally changes how you interact with the natural world. It just demands a new level of respect for the sheer complexity operating invisibly beneath our feet.
It really does. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today, building on that tension between our modern human technology and the ancient technology of the natural world.
Okay.
If the forest floor is essentially a massive, decentralized memory bank and a highly efficient cybernetic processor, what exactly happens to that ancient knowledge and biological memory when we pave over a forest to build a massive concrete server farm for our own artificial intelligence?
Oof, that's a dark thought.
Right? Are we unknowingly destroying an ancient conscious computer just to plug in a newer, much more fragile one? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, especially the world right beneath your feet.